Welcome everyone to the very first episode of my new series, Reign Reviews. This is JuskiReign here, and I'm coming at you today with a review of one of the more recent games that I've completed on my channel, Dirge of Cerberus, Final Fantasy VII. Alright guys, for Dirge of Cerberus, Final Fantasy VII, and as for all future games that I will be reviewing in Reign Reviews, I'll be reviewing the game based on 5 categories. First one being graphics, second, sound, third, gameplay, fourth, story, and fifth, replayability. At the end of all of these categories we'll touch upon, I will take the score that I give for each category, average them all out, and come up with a total score for the game. First up, let's talk about the graphics. Okay, let's keep in mind that this game came out on January 26th of 2006. So we're talking about a 10-year-old game here. This game was released for the PlayStation 2, and so my review of the graphics of this game are going to be coming from the perspective of comparing them to graphics of other games at the time. Of course, we can't compare the graphics to the current generation consoles of games such as those on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, for instance. So, like I said, keep in mind that this is going to be a review based on the graphics of PlayStation 2's era in 2006. So there are 2 different types of graphics we have to consider when doing this review. Something that a lot of PlayStation 2 games did during this era, as well as PlayStation 1 games in the generation before it, where as far as the graphics were concerned, graphics in the actual gameplay compared to graphics in rendered cutscenes were very different. The graphics in rendered cutscenes are of a much higher quality when compared to the graphics in gameplay for Dirge of Cerberus. Like I said, many games did this during this time period of gaming. We're kind of straying away from that more nowadays during the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Wii U generation of games, which in my opinion is very good because it makes for a more seamless gameplay experience. But back in 2006, just like in the original Final Fantasy VII, which was released in 1997, when you had rendered cutscenes, the characters looked more realistic, it was of a higher quality, but you know, you look at that now and you say, hey, these graphics are dated, but for the time period they were very, very good. Dirge of Cerberus did the same kind of thing. I think Vincent looked really good in this game. They took Tetsuya Nomura's character design, what they had to go off of for concept drawings and, you know, concept art, and his Final Fantasy VII character model. They didn't really have a rendered FMV or rendered cutscene for Vincent because he and Yuffie, as you guys very well know, were optional characters in Final Fantasy VII that were added later on in the game's development. So the FMVs, or the rendered cutscenes, did not include those characters. So Vincent, actually, besides the concept art that Tetsuya Nomura had drawn up, the only thing that the developers really had to go on for Vincent were the in-game character blocky models of Vincent in Final Fantasy VII. So for what they developed for Dirge of Cerberus, I was really, really impressed. Now, of course, we don't have an Advent Children looking Vincent, which would have been awesome if the graphical capabilities in 2006 for the PlayStation 2 were able to produce that for us. Of course, if Dirge of Cerberus were to be remastered or remade, which is highly unlikely in my opinion, for the PlayStation 4, we would have something like an Advent Children looking Vincent in that game. Now, fortunately, we have Final Fantasy VII, the remake, to look forward to. I hope it gets, at least the first part gets released in 2017, and we will see Vincent in all of his glory in that game, sure, but that's neither here nor there. This is not a preview video for the Final Fantasy VII remake, but rather a review for Dirge of Cerberus. So anyway, getting back on track for the graphics, we don't have an Advent Children looking Vincent, but we do have a really well-rendered, decent quality character model for Vincent. The other characters in the game, such as the Deep Ground soldiers and the supporting characters, the minor supporting characters, I don't think were quite as detailed as Vincent's character model was. However, the Final Fantasy VII characters that appear in the game, such as Cid, Cloud, Tifa, Barret, they were all incorporated with their Advent Children costumes, their Advent Children designs, and I think they all look fantastic. As far as the backgrounds and environments, they seem to just be polygons with textures overlaid on top, and in my opinion, I think they did a fairly good job with this. Of course, the game, again, keeping in mind it was released in 2006, when you look at it now, you'll see that the graphics are dated, of course, compared to today's games. However, keeping it in mind that it is 2006, and in that perspective, I think they did a pretty good job with the environments and the graphics as far as representing different locations in the Final Fantasy VII universe. On that same token, I would be remiss if I didn't address the atmosphere and the locations of this game that they incorporated from the original Final Fantasy VII universe. Man, oh man, did I really enjoy seeing places like Kalm, Shinra Mansion in Nibelheim, Shinra Headquarters in Midgar, and so many other locations re-represented in this game. It was so cool going through Shinra Manor and remembering what that was like in the original Final Fantasy VII. They actually even incorporated the room where Vincent was sleeping in the coffin, that you were able to go in, and I guess as a kind of little Easter egg, they had an enemy in that coffin that you were able to fight and destroy and actually get, I can't remember, I think it was like 5,000 gil or some kind of reward from killing him. But I just thought that that was such a cool little Easter egg and a cool aspect of the game to incorporate these Final Fantasy VII locations, these so well-known locations, into the game for us to explore in a different kind of perspective. Now that the graphics were updated for the PlayStation 2 as compared to the PlayStation 1, the capabilities that Square were able to use and show off these new environments in a new way, in a new light, so to speak, was really, really awesome in my opinion. And to go through places, like I said, the Shinra Manor, and see the room where Vincent originally was located, and go back to that main lobby and you see the two staircases kind of circling down into the main entrance, and also Shinra Headquarters. You know, outside the building you see the ruined Shinra Headquarters where you know, the meteor, after meteor fall, destroyed all of that. To go back into Shinra Headquarters and see the two staircases going up, I just thought that was really cool, and it brought me right back into what I loved so much about Final Fantasy VII. So what do I say for the overall graphics score for Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII? I'm going to go with a solid 7.5 for graphics. I think they were pretty good. They weren't as excellent as we see now, of course, in today's standards, but for the time in PlayStation 2, I think they really pushed the limit for the graphical capabilities of this game, and in my opinion, the rendered cutscenes look fantastic. The gameplay doesn't look that bad, and I'm going to say again, a solid 7.5. Moving right along onto sound. The sound and music for Dirge of Cerberus, in my opinion, was not as good as it could have been. Unfortunately, Nobuo Uematsu, the original composer for Final Fantasy VII, did not return for this project for Dirge of Cerberus, and rather it was the music and the score was composed by Masashi Hamauzu. And two songs were actually composed and performed by Gact, who's the Japanese rock singer, who, also a little fun fact, the character design of Genesis, the first class soldier in Crisis Core, and spoiler alert, in the ending for Dirge of Cerberus, is actually modeled after Gact. He's a Japanese rock singer, and he composed two tracks for the soundtrack of Dirge of Cerberus. There were times throughout my playthrough of this game that I felt the music was a little bland. It could have been more upbeat, or it could have even set the tone a little bit better during cutscenes or specific events in the game that were key moments. It didn't really grab me like other games do, and especially how Final Fantasy VII did. I mean, I can listen to a track for Final Fantasy VII and picture exactly the scene or the gameplay that was taking place during that song. Not so for Dirge of Cerberus, unfortunately. It did have some good tracks, don't get me wrong. And as far as the sound effects, I think the sound effects in this game are its saving grace for my sound category here, because the music was very lackluster, but the sound effects were very good. The voice acting was decent. They did get the same actors that voiced the characters for Advent Children, which was very good. I was glad to see that, because I do enjoy those voice actors. I think that they really do fit the characters very well. Vincent's character, of course, and then they also had the same actors and actresses for Cloud, Tifa, Barrett, Yuffie, and so forth. So I was glad to see that. However, like I said, the music was okay, wasn't that great. Voice acting was okay. The sound effects were very good. Shooting Vincent's pistols or rifles or shotguns, even the melee sound effects when you were attacking enemies with Vincent's claws and with his fists and kicks and stuff like that. That was very good. I really thought that took us into the game and really, you know, just kind of had a nice touch to the different effects and the different motions and attacks and everything that Vincent was performing. So there's not much else to say about the sound. I think as far as score is concerned, my score, I'm going to give it a 6. The music was lackluster, the voice acting was okay, and the sound effects I feel were the saving grace for this game. So a solid 6 for me on the sound for Dirge of Cerberus. The next category we're going to be covering is gameplay. I actually thought the gameplay for Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII was done pretty well. I really enjoyed being in third-person view and controlling a character as cool as Vincent in the Final Fantasy VII universe. It was cool, again, as I said when we were speaking about the graphics, to be in those environments, but to be able to maneuver around in third-person view, to be able to jump, dash, target enemies. It actually went into a first-person view when targeting with a sniper scope. If you wanted to go into the scope view, it would go into a first-person for more precise accuracy when targeting enemies. But for the most part, it was a third-person game, over the shoulder, and I did enjoy that for this game. The targeting system worked a little bit differently than it does in other third-person shooters. The way this targeting system worked was you had your reticle, your target hair, your crosshairs in the center of the screen, but you also had a larger circle that encompassed around that, where when you targeted an enemy, when you got near an enemy, the larger circle designated the hitbox of that enemy, or as close to the hitbox as it could be, and then you were required to place your smaller reticle inside that larger one for precise accuracy. Anywhere around the center of that larger circle would cause you to hit the enemy, but if you did get it as close to the center as possible, or at the very center, you would get sometimes critical hits and higher damage for those types of shots. It did take some getting used to, but after maybe a few minutes of gameplay, after I beat the first level, I was used to the targeting system, and for the rest of my playthrough, it really wasn't even a concern. It almost came naturally as far as controlling Vincent and shooting enemies. As you can see throughout my playthrough, if you watch my full playthrough of Dirge of Cerberus, you'll see that I did use the melee attack a lot. I did this because, one, it actually felt good to use Vincent's melee attacks. The punches and the kicks actually felt strong. They felt like I was actually hitting an enemy, and they did decent damage, and also it was a neat little way to conserve ammo for later on when I had to do long-range attacks or for boss battles. Dirge of Cerberus also incorporates a dash mechanic in the game. When you press square and a direction, Vincent will dash in that direction. To be honest with you, I tried it out in the beginning parts of the playthrough, and really it doesn't have much of a use throughout the game. I used it a couple times, but it actually is more of a hindrance, in my opinion, than a help, because it takes away from your attack turns that you normally would be able to be shooting the enemy. You can't dash and shoot at the same time, so when you're dashing, you're actually hindering yourself from attacking the enemy, and it doesn't really have a smooth animation to exit the dash. It's almost like you dash to a certain spot, you're stuck there for a second or two, and then you can begin to move again. If it was a seamless dash, it would have been a lot more useful, especially during boss battles, to make use of the dash mechanic. However, with the way that it kind of just stopped you in place, and then you had to continue to move on after that, it really wasn't that helpful. I did, however, in the end of the game, during the last 2 levels, when you play as Chaos, really make use of that dash. And you can see towards the end of the game there was a certain level where you had to maneuver between these crystals that were forming and as Chaos, and to quickly go between one crystal to another you had to attack them with melee attacks in order to be able to destroy them. It was very useful to make use of the dash mechanic as Chaos to get from one to another, and it almost seems like they incorporated a new animation for when you're controlling Chaos to make that dash more smooth. It was just what I was talking about before, referencing how it wasn't a smooth animation coming out of the dash. It's almost like they realized that towards the end of the game when you are transformed into Chaos, and when you dash with Chaos, that mechanic actually is in the game where you kind of come out of it very smoothly and you can go right into an attack or a gunfire. Moving on to items and the item mechanic in the game, I really like the way they introduced using items in Dirge of Cerberus. You had the D-pad that you could press to cycle between items on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, such as potions, high potions, X potions, ethers, even the limit break mechanic in this game that I do have to touch on, otherwise I'll be leaving out a major part of the game. was an item that you collected called the Limit Breaker, and then when you used it, it transformed Vincent from his normal form into Galleon Beast. And Galleon Beast had a lot more health, he was more resistant to enemy attacks, and his melee and projectile attacks were much stronger than Vincent's normal ones. His projectile attacks actually were homing as well. So I usually made use of this mechanic to transform into Galleon Beast for boss battles that I came across. And sometimes if you do have a limit to how many limit breakers you can carry, it was 4 limit breaks I believe you can hold at once. So if I had 4 limit breaks and I found another one in the game world, I would actually use one and then pick up that 4th one to retain my stock of limit breaks and make use of a limit that I found. I thought that was a cool way to introduce the limit breaks into this game, obviously because it wasn't a turn-based game like Final Fantasy VII was. It wasn't so that you could take a certain amount of attacks, build up your limit bar in a battle, and then use it. So I thought incorporating it into an item system was a neat idea. So to cycle through items, you would press a button on your controller that you can map in the settings menu of the game. I had mine mapped to the D-pad, so I would press left on my directional pad and cycle through the items and then use them by pressing the item use button. And I did like how that was incorporated. At times it was kind of tedious to kind of cycle through and, oh, I need a high potion, let me quickly go through and, you know, find my high potion. And sometimes it was difficult for me. As I was going through quickly so that I could avoid enemy attacks and try to get an item, and I would cycle right past it, and I had to go back around and, you know, find that high potion again. I suppose I was able to map a new button to go backwards in the inventory items, but I didn't make use of that, unfortunately, throughout my playthrough. All of my buttons on my controller were mapped to other things, so I only had one button to cycle through the items in my inventory. So oftentimes that was tedious for me. Overall, I'm going to say for gameplay, I'm going to give it a solid 7. The mechanics were good, they were incorporated well. I liked the third-person perspective, I liked the targeting system, the items were okay, and I really liked how they incorporated the limit break system into the gameplay for this game. It was a nice game to play, it felt smooth. I didn't really like the dashing mechanic, but the rest of the gameplay did feel smooth in my opinion, and I did enjoy it very much. So 7 for the gameplay. Our next category that we're going to be covering for Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII is its story. In my opinion, this is where this game really shines. And why wouldn't it, of course? It's a story set in the Final Fantasy VII universe, which, again, in my opinion, is the greatest game of all time ever made, the original Final Fantasy VII. Looking forward to the remake very much. But getting back to Dirge of Cerberus, the story was fantastic. I was hooked on every minute of this game, of this story. Every cutscene was rendered beautifully, in my opinion. The voice actors did a decent job of portraying their characters, and it really was a gripping game as far as you wanting to know what's going to be happening next in the story. I don't really want to discuss the story too much in too much detail because I want to try to keep this as spoiler free as I can for you guys. I know I already mentioned certain things about the end game and end game mechanics that might have spoiled it for you guys a little bit, but I do want to try to keep this as spoiler free as possible. Just the very fact though that you pick right up after Final Fantasy VII ends, the very first cutscene of this game is actually during Meteor Fall when Cloud, Barret, Tifa, and the others are in the northern crater after destroying Sephiroth. Yuffie and Vincent are not in that final cutscene. Really, the real reason why they're not is because the game developers of Final Fantasy VII didn't incorporate Vincent and Yuffie, as I said before, because they were last-minute additions to the game. But Dirge of Cerberus kind of bridges that gap in a really nice way, showing Vincent and Yuffie in Midgar during that time, and that's why you don't see them in the cutscene for Final Fantasy VII. They're actually in Midgar during Meteor Fall, and Vincent is going after Hojo. And I don't really want to spoil it again, like I said, but Hojo is in this game. It really goes into Vincent's past, where Dr. Hojo and Lucrezia, who was Vincent's love interest, that we find that out in Final Fantasy VII, how they really performed all these experiments on different people. On Vincent, he was a Turk at the time, and they were performing experiments on Vincent as a Turk. Vincent's father actually makes an appearance in the game. You see how Vincent's love interest, Lucrezia, and how his feelings toward her and her feelings were not the same toward him. And it even touches a bit on Lucrezia's guilt and why she sealed herself away in those Mako crystals in the waterfall cave in Final Fantasy VII. The game then goes into Vincent's struggle against the Deep Ground Soldiers, which was a new organization introduced for Dirge of Cerberus, but they tie it back to the Final Fantasy VII universe, where these soldiers did exist even though we didn't know about them in Final Fantasy VII. It's a really cool way that they incorporate that to extend the story and the universe in Final Fantasy VII for Dirge of Cerberus. And they also even incorporate new main characters, new main villains, who are the Deep Ground leaders, such as Vice the Immaculate. We got Rosso the Crimson, a few others, Nero, and just a few other characters that you fight up against as you progress through the storyline in Dirge of Cerberus. Again, I don't want to spoil it too much, but make sure if you guys do play this game, there are 3 G reports that you need to collect during the last few chapters of the game. I think one's in Chapter 8 and the others are in Chapter 11 and 12, I believe. If you get those 3, you will unlock a secret ending at the end of the game. After the ending, there's an additional scene, which is really, really cool to see. It actually ties it all the way back to Crisis Core, which was the PSP game that came out as a prequel to Final Fantasy VII. There's a character from there that makes an appearance in the ending, and I was very, very satisfied with the ending. It didn't really leave anything open to to your own judgment or to your own imagination. It kind of wrapped everything up in a nice little package, and I really recommend, if not for anything else, if you don't like the graphics of this game, if you don't like the gameplay, if you don't like the music, really, really play this game to appreciate the story. Or at least look up the gameplay, the cutscenes on YouTube, and watch it that way. Because the story, if you guys are into Final Fantasy VII, it's definitely worth watching and investing time into checking out the story that they incorporated into Dirge of Cerberus. I really, really like this story in the game, and I'm very happy that I played through it just to see the story, if not anything else, like I said. For the score, as far as the story in this game, I'm going to give it a 9. I really enjoyed it. Again, I'm a little bit biased because I'm a huge Final Fantasy VII fanboy, and I love Vincent as a character. It was just so great to see him starring in his own game and go through the adventures of his life after Final Fantasy VII and what happened as far as his character development and tying some loose ends up from Final Fantasy VII. I really liked that in this game, and I really enjoyed the story very much. So again, it's a solid 9 from me. The last category I want to talk about for Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII is its replayability. Now, Dirge of Cerberus does include side missions that you do unlock by playing through the main story of the game. After completing the game, you can go back and play different side missions. In my playthrough, personally, I didn't do any of the side missions, so I really can't speak on my personal experience of the additional content in the game. However, there are side missions, and there's even a new difficulty setting that you unlock after completing the game. You can play through the game again on a harder difficulty to go through and unlock more upgrades. And of course, I believe you can do this and keep all of your items and upgrades and equipment that you've obtained through your first playthrough of the game, almost like a New Game Plus kind of a thing, where you'll play it on a higher difficulty and continue to upgrade your items, your guns, your materia, collect more gil, and even level up Vincent further, because Vincent does have a character level as you play throughout the game that you do gain experience by destroying enemies, and you can apply that to his character level to increase things like his strength, his health, his intelligence, his defense, and basic RPG-like attributes. Again, I didn't really get into any of that, so I'm just basing my knowledge of these side missions and the New Game Plus based around what I've read about the game and what I've seen. There are actually different memory capsules that you can shoot throughout the game that I actually did find quite a few of them as I was playing the game. In the beginning, I actually thought they were the G reports that you needed for the extra ending. I found out later on that they weren't G reports at all. Those came much later in the game, like I mentioned before. But these capsules actually unlock things like concept art or soundtracks, different music you can listen to in the game and things like that. So it is kind of a neat aspect to go back, and if you missed any of those, do a New Game Plus, go to a new difficulty and try to collect those memory capsules that you haven't yet found to unlock additional content such as concept art. Overall, for replayability on this game, even though I didn't go back and play through it a second time, I want to give it a score of 7. It's decent enough to want to go back to play through it for the reasons I mentioned before, such as unlocking concept art, and also to try to keep your upgrades going with upgrading Vincent and his guns, and even some side missions you can do at the end of the game just as a fun little, side content to keep the life of the game going. So a 7 is the score from me for replayability. Alright guys, so we went through the 5 main categories for my Reign review on Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII. We gave the graphics a 7.5, the sound got a 6, the gameplay got a score of 7, the story received a score of 9, and replayability received a score of 7. So if we total all these up and average everything out, we come to a final total score of 7.3 for Dirge of Cerberus. 7.3 I think is a solid score for this type of game. I really liked it. I think the story and my biasness towards it in the Final Fantasy VII universe really helped for my review to push the score up to a higher score than, let's say, an average person would give this game. But I think with my love for the Final Fantasy VII universe, for Vincent, Lucrezia, Cloud, Tifa, Barret, Kate Sith, everybody in this universe, it really just took me back. I played Final Fantasy VII so many times, more times than I care to admit, and more times than I want to count. And just, for me, it was the first time playing Dirge of Cerberus, and it took me right back to the world of Final Fantasy VII. I enjoyed it very, very much. Highly recommend it for you guys if you haven't played it, and you do like the Final Fantasy VII universe and the lore. Play this game, if not for anything else, like I said, just for the story, so that you can experience Final Fantasy VII in a new way that you haven't experienced before. I think it's fairly easy to get. I picked up my copy from Amazon, and I actually streamed it on a real PlayStation 2. So you could search Amazon or eBay or even maybe one of your local game stores that sell retro games that you can actually try to find this game. And if you still have a PlayStation 2, pick it up, play it. It's definitely going to be worth it in my opinion. You won't be disappointed. Alright everyone, that's going to conclude the very first episode of Reign Reviews. I hope you guys enjoyed it very much. It was on one of the games that I've recently completed for my channel. You can check out my Dirge of Cerberus playthrough in the description below. You can click on that and that'll take you to my playlist for my entire playthrough. There are 14 videos in all. I named them according to the chapters in the game, so you can go ahead and check that out if you haven't seen it yet. And my next Reign Reviews video will be coming up covering another game that I've completely played through on my channel here from beginning to end, so keep a lookout for that. Be on the lookout. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you all in the next video. This is JuskiReign, and I will see you all later.